We now come to the statement. Minister Jim McMahon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. With permission, I would like to make a statement on the publication of the Government's English Devolution White Paper. Mr Speaker, this Government was elected on the promise of change, and we are determined to transform our economy, our country, through a decade of reform and national renewal that reverses the chaos and decline we inherited, rebuilding Britain from the ground up so that it works for working people, with a mission-led plan for change that unlocks growth and raises living standards in every region, delivering new homes, jobs and opportunities for all, by matching investment with reform to improve local services and to maximise the impact of every penny we spend. Mr Speaker, the British people deserve an economy that works for the whole country, with control over things that matter to them, which is why we're moving power out of Westminster and putting it back into the hands of those who know their areas best. The white paper we published today sets out the means by which we want to achieve this, backed up by our landmark English Devolution Bill, which will finally redress the imbalance of power between this place and communities up and down the country. And, Mr Speaker, this change cannot be delivered soon enough, because for all the promises of levelling up, after 14 years, our nations remain economically divided, with living standards in many parts of the country stagnating. We have an economy that hoards potential, and we have a politics that hoards power. As a former councillor and council leader, I have seen the difference that local leadership can make, and in such an immediate and a tangible way. But I also recognise the frustration that local leaders face in delivering the change that their areas need. In fact, it mirrors the frustration local people feel in being able to effect change in their neighbourhoods and on their high streets. And it hits at the heart of what it means to live a decent life, with pride of place and security, a right too often denied in the places where it's needed the most. Which is why this government is determined to end the top-down approach to decision-making in this country and replace it with a principle of partnership. The last Labour government began the process of change by creating the London Mayor, the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Senate and the Northern Ireland Assembly. And I have seen the transformational impact of empowered local leadership in Greater Manchester when, in 2014, now a decade ago, I was one of the local council leaders who worked in cooperation to agree the first English devolution agreement outside of London, an agreement that created the combined authority which has delivered genuine change under the leadership of an elected mayor working hand in glove with local leaders. Now, crucially, none of the now 12 strong mayors would claim that they do this alone. Whether it's attracting investment in clean carbon, renewable energy investment, growing digital and creative industries, bringing buses back under public control, tackling violence against women and girls, all would point to solid local partnerships and the importance of local government in delivering that change. But the truth in England is that the process of devolution remains unfinished, which is why we are introducing the measures before you today to finally get the job done. At its core, this white paper sets out how the government will strengthen and widen the mayoral model of devolution across England, shifting power, decision-making and money away from Westminster as part of a completely new way of governing and driving growth. And empowering more mayors through integrated funding settlements, a statutory role in the rail network, greater control over strategic planning and housing funding and skills training so that they can deliver change that local people can see and benefit from. Ultimately, Mr Speaker, our goal is mayoral devolution at a level that means that powers can be used to shape local labour markets, integrated transport systems, clusters of businesses and housing development. The sorts of strategic decision-making that is not possible to do over a smaller geographic area. By creating strategic authorities as a new tier of local government, we will give our cities and our regions a bigger voice in getting the resources and the support that they need. The government will shortly set out its devolution priority programme for areas who stand ready to progress devolution at an accelerated timetable, with a plan for inaugural mayor elections to take place in May 2026. Each of these areas will have an elected mayor, sitting on the Council of Nations and Regions, and for those areas already in discussions with the government, we will work with you to confirm your position. And for those areas ready to move at a pace, we say, come forward now, be part of this movement, be part of this moment. But we also understand that devolution is a journey and that some will need to take their time to decide what course they wish to follow. We want to walk alongside all areas defined locally, not imposed by a map from the centre, to take the first step to realise the potential of devolution, for instance, for a foundation agreement to unlock new powers. But our ambition is absolutely clear, and we will legislate for a new power of ministerial directive which allows government to create strategic authorities where absolutely necessary, if local agreement has not been possible to achieve full coverage of devolution across England. We will deliver a new constitutional settlement for England that makes devolution the default setting, with an ambitious devolution framework secured in law, guaranteeing powers for each level of devolution. And all of this will be underpinned by improvements to accountability, including an outcomes framework for integrated settlements so that it remains fit for purpose as we devolve more powers and funding. And, Mr Speaker, none of this reform can be achieved without strong local government. Councils are the bedrock of our state. They are critical to driving growth, delivering local public services that people can rely on. But they've been neglected for far too long. That's why we're establishing a proper partnership with local leaders through multi-year funding settlements and moving away from the farcical bidding wars for limited ring-fence funding pots. And we'll give councils the respect and powers that they deserve and need to deliver the missions and the plan for change that is so keenly felt in every community. We said we would reset the relationship between central and local government, and we meant it, giving councils the certainty and stability they need to plan ahead and prioritise their budget to tackle local issues through public sector reform and prevention, rather than more expensive crisis management where taxpayers are paying more for often worsening outcomes. We have to tackle this head on. And, Mr Speaker, it's also important that councils are the right size and shape to serve the people that they represent, with simpler structures that people can better understand. Through our bold programme of unitarisation, as announced by my honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer at the budget, we will ensure that local government reorganisation and devolution can be delivered in tandem as soon as possible. And we look forward to areas coming forward with their own proposals. This gives the clear direction that local government have been asking for. My door is always open for discussions with colleagues about how this will look and feel in their area. And though I recognise that this will be challenging as a process for some, for many there is a growing agreement that the time has now come for change. And, Mr Speaker, I'm under no illusions about the scale of the task we face to deliver more power into the hands of local leaders. But we are committed to resetting the relationship with local and regional government, working together with local leaders to deliver the change the country voted for, and by which the electorate will judge this government on. Placed alongside the work we're progressing on fixing the broken audit system, rebuilding the standards regime and bringing forward plans for community power, it shows the government is determined to get the house in order and to see a top-to-bottom redistribution of power in England. As we reset our economy, restore local government and rebuild our country from the ground up so that it works finally for working people. And in the end, that's what it means to take back control, and that's what we will deliver. I commend this statement to the House.
Shall the Minister?
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker. According to the Ipsos Mori Veracity Index, 41% of our constituents trust local councillors, with just 19% having the same expectation of government ministers. That is a reflection of the value that we place on local leaders.
It's a current survey. On
local leaders who know and understand our communities. And those local leaders, Mr Speaker, will be getting a very clear message from this white paper, that this government feels that the men from Whitehall know best what their place needs. Not bottom-up local leadership, but top-down templates for local government. Not the chance to flourish as a place and a community with a unique identity and history, with an expectation of being subsumed into an anonymous structure that knows and cares little for local areas, focusing instead on Whitehall targets. And through the back door, Madam Deputy Speaker, by stripping local politicians of a say over important planning decisions and the imposition of financial assumptions that further constrain local decision-making, our local democracy is undermined. Mr. Speaker, or Madam Deputy Speaker, instead of genuine devolution, what this white paper sets out is a reductive approach. It's a mishmash of new tiers, new taxes, taking decision-making further distance away from residents, and if the experience of London is anything to go by, costing them a fortune at the same time. And more concerning still, Madam Deputy Speaker, it fails the key test of starting with a clear understanding of what we require our local councils to actually do. Over 800 services delivered by each council on average, ranging from education, public health, environmental standards, children and vulnerable adult safeguarding, early years, libraries, museums, not to mention their key regulatory functions, such as trading standards, housing enforcement, and acting as the billing authority for billions in taxes. It's hard to see how demanding that all those local officers simultaneously reapply for their own jobs will help them to focus on the needs of their communities, not to mention cope with huge additional responsibilities heading their way via legislation such as the Renters' Rights Bill. Nor, Madam Deputy Speaker, does it build on the successes that we already see. It's common for councils to share services and staff to reduce the cost to taxpayers. Breckland and South Holland have shared a chief executive for many years. Trading standards has been a shared service across London for a long time, and those measures driven by local leadership are what deliver genuine savings and also service improvements. So let us look, Madam Deputy Speaker, at some of the most serious concerns that we on this side have arising from the bill, above and beyond the years of disruption to council services and the rising taxes. At a time when Labour councils are telling this government that it is already failing on its housing targets and that its plans are undeliverable, why would the government be focusing on removing elected councillors' say on planning, rather than focusing on building the more than 1 million units that already have planning permission, or electing mayors to a timetable which is not in any way clear? At a time when our constituents are labouring under a rising tax burden, the chilling prospect set out of mayoral levies charged at nil rates by Conservative mayors such as Ben Houchin and Andy Street, but now topping at £471 per bandy household in London under Mayor Khan. The black hole in local government finances, Madam Deputy Speaker, just got bigger. And imposing mayoral control over grant funding for housing and regeneration, detaching it from the host communities, moving those decisions to a remote mayoral tier, further undermines that concept of local consent for development. But perhaps most worrying for local council taxpayers are the plans around Great British Energy local power plans, with the potential to take even more local authorities to the edge of bankruptcy, as local energy companies have already done in Nottingham and Bristol. Madam Deputy Speaker, in conclusion, this could have been so much more. A chance to rethink from scratch the duties, the responsibilities and the funding of local government, and to ensure that its form follows its function. Our local leaders, many from my own party, will do their best with what is available, and we will have their backs as they do what they can for the interests of the people that they serve. But make no mistake, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is a massive missed opportunity. This white paper shows that rewiring our state, rethinking our approach to local government, fulfilling the aspirations of local leaders and communities are being put aside in favour of bureaucratic and structural tinkering. There is a minister, Madam Deputy Speaker, who once stood at this dispatch box and called for genuine fiscal devolution, the devolution of powers across things like education, and demanded, Madam Deputy Speaker, more say for local people to hold decision makers to account. Whatever happened to that local champion, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'll come to some of the questions that were raised, but let nobody in this chamber take lessons and lectures from the other side when it comes to the perilous state that local government has been left in, Madam Deputy Speaker. Let's talk about the councils that were going bust left, right and centre on their watch. Let's talk about the fiscal discipline on 1,000 audit backlogs. And what does 1,000 audit backlogs mean? It means £100 billion of public money they couldn't account for and that held up the national accounts being signed off. That was their legacy, and they talk about being custodians of public money. They didn't even know where the money was. And what about the crisis that was building up in adult social care, in children's, in homelessness? At the time when we should have been about prevention and reform and getting ahead of the problem, government centrally were making matters worse and not better. And so when they talk about the legacy, and on the side of councillors, which was the government that eroded the standards regime, that left councillors open to abuse, to intimidation, that turned council chambers into hostile, toxic environments where the teeth from the standards regime was completely put to one side? Which was the government that made councillors publish their home addresses when they were facing death threats? Where were they? And the work that we're doing now to repair the foundations of local government, giving it the funding that's needed, and after a decade of year-by-year funding, given a multi-year financial settlement so he can get his house in order, is part of the rebuilding work. And that's what's needed now. Grown-up politics, a plan to fix the country, a plan to put local government back on its feet. But just doing that is not enough. We have got to break the centralising system. Literally, if you wanted £1 million for a local project, the previous government made you compete with your neighbouring council for a limited supply of money. The bidding wars that took place, it wasted millions of pounds of public money and in the end did not deliver up on its core promise of levelling up. That was the agenda, and it's got to change. We have got to change that cap-in-hand relationship, that parent-child relationship, where the power is hoarded at the centre. And I can say, those that are queuing up to have conversations about reforming public services, about devolving powers to mayoral combined authorities, maybe not the people on the front bench here, but it is Conservative council leaders who recognise they finally have a government on side willing to work in partnership to do the changes the previous government failed to.
Chair of the Select Committee, Florence, Eshalomi. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I think just to thank the Minister for this statement, and it's about how we bring local leaders back to the agenda and back to some of the central aims that they've been complaining about over the last 14 years. And it's important that any devolution reforms builds trust amongst local people who rely on those vital services from housing, planning, social care. So the Minister must keep this in mind as he's going through the reforms. But ultimately, there will be some councils who may fear that residents' voices in smaller district areas may lose that if they're absorbed into larger unitary authorities. So can the Minister outline how he'll ensure that residents do not feel disenfranchised by losing representation in their community? And should residents choose not to adopt a mayoral model, can the Minister assure this House that those residents will not be disadvantaged? We know that our frontline services are at breaking point. The Minister's outlined this, and I think many will welcome the multi-year settlement. But what we don't want to see is a case where adult social care, temporary accommodation, all those areas become stuck between a disbanding district authority and the nebulous unitary authority. So can the Minister assure the House that there will be proper accountability during the reorganisation and we won't see local residents and councillors left in limbo?
Can I thank the Chair of the Select Committee for that very important point in terms of how do we maintain public trust and confidence in a period of change? Well, first of all, is to say that local government representations coming to government will be self-organised within counties, and we will be receiving the recommendations and requests that are coming forward. So we will be writing out to all of the 21 areas in scope, inviting them to make representations to be part of a first wave priority programme. We expect from conversations that we've had already that there will be a significant number of local authorities who want to be part of that reorganisation. But to be clear, that is not a list that we hold, that we're imposing. We are writing out, and local areas are self-organising because they understand that reform and modernisation is absolutely central. Now, when it comes to not losing a local voice, if members read the white paper as it stands, we were very clear to make sure that the devolution offer isn't just about creating new structures, and certainly is not about just creating new politicians. This has got to be a genuine shift of power, and there's a big section in there on community power. Because in the end, I think a lot of people, and maybe this even transcends the previous government still, do not feel power in the places where they live. They feel quite often that things are done to them, and when they look at the decline of the high streets and town centres, they feel quite often that the change is just going one way and it's not good. And so the paper is about rebuilding that local community power, and our expectation is, regardless of the size of local authority, that every council, including existing unitaries, work a way of getting to those local communities at a neighbourhood level and to reflect in a democratic way and a public service way how best to give local people a voice. And our expectation in the white paper is absolutely clear on that.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Vikki Slade.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Local councils are the backbone of our communities, delivering services to every home and business. And under the last Conservative government, their funding was slashed while their responsibilities were broadened, which means that many are now facing a financial precipice not of their making, and as they are the ones alongside residents, they're usually the ones in the firing line when people and businesses are distressed. I've faced local government reorganisation before when leader of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council. 5 years on in Dorset, the public are not convinced that large unitaries work for them. They don't see services improve, they just see a more remote council that has to cover a much bigger area, moving money from where it was raised to be spent elsewhere, and through an organisation that can't understand the differing needs. Scale that up even further, and I fear that more issues and individual community needs will slip through the net. The paper talks of mutual respect and collective purpose, but by giving such extended powers and the ability to lever a mayoral tax to mayors, I wonder if the Minister could confirm what specifically will be left for council leaders. For my area of Wessex, which of course is Thomas Hardy country, rather than being well-known local leaders, the creation of a mega mayor is more likely to be compared to Jude the Obscure. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm deeply concerned about the impact on local authority staff, both now and for prospects in the future, including their ability to move between councils to develop their skills. Councils have already rationalised staffing to make ends meet and shared services, as was referenced by the Shadow Minister, and they will struggle to reinvent again. What plans does the Government have to ensure local authorities will be sufficiently funded to implement such changes and to limit the outflow of millions of pounds to consultants to make this happen? And turning to the role of elected members, the lived experience of these community leaders is so worthwhile, and I'm deeply concerned about the loss of districts and district councillors and a move to the strategically elected members. Those people are likely to be required to travel much further and give so much more of their time, making it harder for people with caring responsibilities or full-time careers to serve. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, the paper brings forward potential sanctions for breaches of standards, which is very welcome, but says little about how we reset the relationship with those councillors to make sure that the time and effort that they put in is properly reflected. The White Paper fails to say anything about the ticking time bomb of social care in any meaningful way, and its reference to the financial crisis being faced up and down the country hints at further devolution. But it does say that further things may require... My question. What can the Minister do to ensure that local communities are able to avoid feeling like this is a top-down diktat and make their own decisions about the future?
Before I come to the Minister, can I just remind members that time is a bit of a premium here. If I want to get everybody in, Minister.
Thank you. Can I thank the opposition spokesperson for the question, and also for a service, of course, as an elected member for a period as well. I understand there will be concerns about the move to larger unitaries, but the fact is there is a two-tier premium that the taxpayer is paying for. And at a time when resources are limited, we do have a responsibility to take money from overhead costs in councils in the back office and to get them to the front lines that people have good neighbourhood services. And I would suspect, when asked the question, do you prefer an existing two-tier system or more money being directed at local public services, most people would want the money to go to local public services. But there is a balance here, and it's for local areas to get that scale. We're very clear in the White Paper that we want to move away from councillors being perceived as backbench councillors, and we want to reform them essentially as frontline councillors of the conveners of a community, with greater power, influence and the ability to get things done. And on the matter of social care, there was an additional £4 billion provided in the budget. The provisional settlement will be announced this week. And of course, £600 million of that was for a recovery grant to go to areas with high deprivation but low tax bases to make sure that we rebalance the fairness in the system.
Cat Smith.
The Minister in his statement said that this was the end of a top-down approach from central government, but to many of my constituents this looks a lot like a one-size-fits-all model that works for Greater Manchester, which he represents quite ably, but doesn't necessarily work for the rural English counties. So what assurance can the Minister give my constituents, and frankly me, that this will not be imposed upon local areas against their will, and how will he measure consent from a local area that this is the approach that they want?
Can I thank the Honourable Member for the question and also for submitting the Westminster Hall debate on this very issue. We don't accept at all the one-size-fits-all argument any more than to say that councillors work in some areas but not others, members of parliament work in some areas but not others. In the end, mayors, when given the powers and the resources, can achieve change in partnership with local leaders. We are not creating super councils, we are creating a strategic authority that gives power from this place downwards and allows councillors to have far more power. Now, how we do it with local areas to come, and I think what I can say in Lancashire is that in our kind of drive to widen devolution across the country, the principle there is for foundation authorities, but of course Lancashire has already agreed to a level 2, which in the White Paper would be the equivalent of foundation authority, and in that sense has devolution already in place.
Sir Edward Leigh.
So the government says it wants to end the top-down approach. How does this square with a district council like West Lindsey in Lincolnshire being denied any say in massive solar farms or wind turbines? Indeed, will he do me a favour and confirm that his aim is to pass more power back to district councils, and indeed will he promise me that he will not unilaterally abolish them just because we have a new mayor for Lincolnshire?
Well, it'd be a bit rude to diminish the powers of the Mayor of Lincolnshire before it is in place, particularly given that I'm the person moving the order to enable the election to happen. We want the Mayor of Greater Lincolnshire to be a success. We could have taken a different view. It was the legacy agreement that was carried over from the general election. But genuinely, and those are leaders of different parties than my own, I recognise that the leaders there worked in good faith to have an agreement with the previous government that we felt needed to be honoured. And so there is no willingness on our side to do that. And that needs to be the tone of all these conversations. If you take out party politics, and there can be quite a lot of that takes place in this place, those are not the conversations that I have with council leaders and councillors across the country who genuinely want to put party politics to one side and to work in the interests of their local community. When it comes to the question of the power over local planning decisions, if local councils want power, local councils have got to have a plan.
Emma Lewell-Buck.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Decisions taken in this place are subject to rigorous scrutiny and accountability. But recent history in several areas show that this is not always the case when it comes to local decision-making. Not all councillors and mayors are paragons of virtue. So as we dissolve more powers, can my honourable friend explain what levels of scrutiny and accountability will be built into his plans?
Minister.
It's a very important point, and we are very mindful in a sense because devolution in England has really been developed by deal rather than a clear framework from the outset. There are naturally gaps, and I don't decry, by the way, that progress was made in filling the map of, in particular, the Midlands and the north of England previously. But we do need to reconcile that now. If we're giving more powers and resources downwards, we need to make sure that the checks and balances are robust, and there is a lot that we need to do. So there are recommendations in the White Paper that talk about the principles, say, of a local public accounts committee, so that public spending can be brought into scope of that. We are looking at the oversight for bodies that strategic authorities establish, such as trading companies or joint ventures, to see whether they should be in scope of best value, for instance. And we're also looking at the kind of checks and balances for the officer structure, about whether or not we bring in an accountable officer type structure in the way that a local authority does, to make sure that there is a clear difference between the political leadership and the operational leadership and the powers that each have.
Gagan Mohindra.
Thank you, Madam. Welcome the Minister to his place. First opportunity I've had to do so. As his department will be aware, both Decorum and Three Rivers in my constituency do not have a local plan in place, both controlled by the Lib Dems. Can the Minister confirm what would happen in the case of his proposed plans? Separate to that, we have local county elections next May. What is his intentions? Do they still go ahead? There's a lot of uncertainty. And in terms of 2026, how many mayoral elections is he anticipating?
Minister.
Thank you. I mean, on the point around a local plan, if any area at this point has failed to get a local plan in place, they are leaving the door open to development to take place without any of the checks and balances and in a way that really does take away local power. And we are trying to reconcile that now, where we're getting the balance. And I hear quite often about the housing targets that have been set and the 1.5 million new homes. I should say, by the way, there's lots of good, skilled working class jobs that go with that 1.5 million new homes. But there are 150 kids in temporary accommodation who need a home. There are 500 kids in hotels in my constituency who deserve a secure, affordable place to live. And so there is a bigger crisis here, which is why local plans are so important. Where they are not in place, we are going to have to look at strategic plans looking at those areas. And obviously we're out to consultation on a number of those points. On the question of county elections, so the letter will go out today to county councils. It will invite them to make a submission in January. Subject to that submission being robust, it can be part of a priority programme. We will do what the previous government did and to accept the view that if a local authority will not exist in the near future, it makes no sense to make an election to it. However, we will very soon after want to have an election for the shadow authority that will follow. And so further detail will follow on that.
Oliver Ryan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his white paper? There are 5 pages at the back of this white paper of powers that are not currently enjoyed by Lancashire as a foundation authority. Would he agree to work with partners in Lancashire to make sure that we can get a deal done and over the line for a mayoral and a reorganisation package? Lancashire's time is now, and in his words, can we grasp this moment and this movement? Thank you.
Minister.
Well, I'm glad someone who was listening. I think there's huge opportunities in Lancashire. If we think about the work that's been done now to secure a mayoral combined authority in Hull and East Yorkshire, if we think about the opportunities in Cumbria, in Cheshire and Lancashire, that completes the map of the North. Our leaders there are already self-organising through the Great North Project, chaired by Mayor Kim McGuinness, to really kind of lead from the front on inward investment. And it would be a shame, given the economic success that Lancashire has, particularly on energy and other issues, that it's not part of that agenda. And I should say, on reorganisation, I do think that most people in Lancashire do accept that the time, after probably 20 years or more of talking about it, had probably come, but it is for local areas to come together, to have a plan that's right for their place and to make a submission to government. It's not for government to redraw the map of England and to impose it on every community. But our ambition is clear and the direction is clear, that we absolutely welcome areas making that submission and we want to work towards more mayoral combined authorities.
Lewis Cocking.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I place on record my thanks to my 2 district councils who are wholeheartedly support Broxbourne and East Herts. On page 17 of the white paper, it says the government wants to create unitaries of 500,000 or more. What does or more mean? Does that mean I could end up with a super council for Hertfordshire covering 1.2 million people, a proposal which I would not support?
Minister.
Well, in some ways, we have to give direction, because what we heard during the consultation stage with local government, and that includes, by the way, the county council network and the district council network, is the more clarity of a framework that can be provided by central government up front, far better for local government to be able to organise. And so we were very clear that on an efficiency level, if the drive is for efficiency, that 500,000 is roughly the population that you would need to draw out those efficiencies. And so in the example that he gave, that wouldn't be 1.2 million, that might be, say, 2 or even 3, because in areas where areas are in discussions for a mayoral combined authority, we have accepted, and it's outlined in the paper, that there will need to be some flexibility in terms of scale and size of the local authorities that sit under it.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. In Derbyshire, we already have a mayor in place, but we have a 2-tier authority. Can my honourable friend be clear that under these circumstances, if we can't get agreement on the size of the unitary authority, would an authority like Derbyshire still be having elections next May? And would there be any opportunity, how would he end up breaking this impasse if we have those at county wanting 1 Derbyshire and those on the districts probably wanting 2 or 3?
Minister.
So I should be clear that the assumption is that elections in counties are taking place as planned, with the exception of those areas who actively come to us to say that they want reorganisation discussions and they have a proposal that they can work up. In that case, we will take the view that elections to an authority that won't exist need to be postponed, enable to allow an election to follow for a shadow authority then that would follow for that. On Derbyshire, we need to be careful here. So the government's role is to invite and to receive. It's not our job to draw the maps that then follow. It's for local areas to do that. And my role in particular is obviously quasi-judicial. I will need to take a view on potentially competing proposals. And so on that basis, I can't comment on the individual counties on what they may or may not look like.
Leigh Dillon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Councils are clearly on their knees, and I welcome multi-year funding settlements and changes to the grant programme. But can you confirm, can the Minister confirm that councils' budgets won't have a penny spent on devolution and the government will support it so that they can focus on their frontline services? And in the Minister's statement, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister said that councils could take their time to decide on the course they wish to follow, but in the next paragraph it goes on to say, but they will legislate to create where the government feel necessary. How does the Minister square those two sentences?
Minister.
Can I thank him for his question? Well, that's about partnership, it's about tone, and it's about how we work together. Now, our expectation is, because there's been quite a lot of talk in the sector about reorganisation and devolution, there has been, even before the white paper, a number of areas that have come to government and say we want a conversation about local reorganisation and or devolution. And so what we've had to do as a government is to say, well, we can't have 100 hairs running all over the place without a plan, a timescale that's transparent, that can be understood, and people can make a judgment about whether it's right for their area or not. And so what we will have is a proposal to double run, essentially, a devolution priority programme alongside a local reorganisation. There'll be key points where those two pieces of work have to come together for joint decision making. But at least by that way, every area knows where it's up to and it can make a choice about whether they are at the right point in the process to opt into that or whether they need to take more time. The point about the backstop is really important. As I say, there is no map that we are looking to impose anywhere. But let's just say within a region, we have an agreement to compile every county bar one, and we get to the end of the Parliament, then I think it is legitimate to say, well, there's nowhere else to go. It's fairly self-explanatory that you're going to have a foundational strategic authority in that area. And that's the type of process that we're looking at. We are not looking at redrawing the map of England that imposes this in one swoop. This is about partnership, it's about working with local areas, and so far those conversations have been very fruitful.
Andy McMahon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I usually welcome this white paper. For us that have been in the front line trying to deliver services to our residents in the dysfunctional two-tier system that exists in Lancashire today, this is a breath of fresh air and exactly what we've been asking for years. So would the Minister agree with me that now is the time for Lancashire leaders to put aside short-term personal and political considerations, not wait for the bill to be published, and work with urgency to bring forward proposals for new local government structures that are focused on the needs of residents and which can ultimately bring the highest level of devolution to Lancashire?
Minister.
Well, I absolutely understand that there are local tensions in Lancashire. I would say, though, to put it mildly, I would say, though, that my experience of council leaders across all parties, at county, at district or unitary level, has been positive, and even where there are differences, they are shared in a respectful way. And I wouldn't underestimate the progress of the Level 2 agreement that we have in Lancashire, that will see a devolution of skilled powers, the CPO powers and others, as a first step to devolution. Now, within that agreement, there was a commitment that by autumn next year, a proposal for a mayoral combined authority would be submitted to government, and that may be with or without local government reorganisation. We have now been very clear about our direction on local government reorganisation, and our expectation is that Lancashire and other places have heard that direction and will act accordingly. And in the end, times change. You know, my son's primary school in Oldham had the Lancashire Education Committee plaque on it. In County Hall in Lancashire, there is the Oldham plaque. But times change, boundaries change, but people and communities don't. And the government that represents them has to be fit for purpose.
James Cleverly.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. If devolution means anything, it means giving local leaders the right to do things differently. So if, for example, a future mayor of Essex wants to compete with London with a less heavily regulated or a less heavily taxed business environment, would that individual have the power to do so under the proposals put forward by the government?
Minister.
I mean, it's in the eye of the beholder. If he wants to turn Essex into Monaco, that's not going to happen. But if what he's asking for is genuine freedoms and flexibilities, so that local leaders can make the right decisions to attract investment, to assemble sites, to invest in infrastructure, to remove barriers to planning and infrastructure, then that is absolutely where we're going to. We're very clear on the issue of tax and fiscal devolution. We are very clear that the white paper represents a moment in time. It's very much the start, it's not the end. And what should be read in the paper is an ambition to provide certainty across government to make sure that the level of ambition is raised. And I think when he sees a schedule of devolution across programme, and importantly on the competences, which are very important in terms of economic development and regeneration, he will see there's lots of scope there.
Matt Rodder.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I thank the Minister for his statement today. I welcome the prospect of further devolution of powers over transport and housing and other important economic matters. And I would like to ask the Minister whether he could outline some of the greater scope for using those powers. So, for example, in Berkshire, we would like to see a Western Rail link to Heathrow, which would dramatically improve connectivity between Reading and Slough Heathrow airports. There are many other strategic projects which have been held up, unfortunately, such as a third bridge for Reading. Would you like to comment on the potential benefits of the devolution on these issues?
Minister.
The honourable member makes a good point. When I said that this is less about structures and politicians and more about outcomes, there is actually the example that we need to be looking towards. You know, the real test for many people is if I'm standing on a miserable Monday at the bus stop when it's raining, does the bus turn up or not? And actually just having more control over local bus services through franchising or even public ownership is part of the offer that's on the table. But buses alone don't fix the transport system. We need rail devolution alongside it. And so the white paper points to a very ambitious schedule of devolution when it comes to rail, very ambitious devolution when it comes to multimodal, and in particular single ticketing. Because in the end, even if you had coordination of transport, it needs to be affordable for people, and different modes of transport need to be linked when it comes to single ticketing as well. So the opportunities are definitely there on the transport agenda.
Tim Farron.
The Minister will know that in Cumbria we are still going through the process of a reorganisation that happened just 18 months ago, and all reorganisations, for better or for worse, are massively distracting and take people's eye off the ball. Would he therefore understand why residents and businesses and everybody else in both parts of Cumbria and the new authorities that we have there now are outraged at the thought that there might be an imposition of a mayoral model upon us? Isn't that the opposite of devolution? Isn't it right the local community should be able to have the devolution that we want, and we're up for all the devolution the Minister will give us? We just don't see why we should have a top-down mayoral model and be told we have to have a reorganisation again 5 minutes after the last one.
Minister.
Well, I think the point in Cumbria, and by the way, I pay tribute to the leaders in Cumbria for the engagement that we've had, recognising that they have just been through local reorganisation. There has been a lot to settle in that area. They have embraced the conversations that we've had, I think, with great maturity, and they have been fruitful. But we do recognise that different places are at different points, and different places have different pressures that they need to reconcile, which is why we're looking at a priority programme for the areas that are ready to go soon, and that will be very soon, to get the legislation in place, to have the consultation in place, and to make the case to the public. But for those areas that need longer, of course, we accept in some areas. But I might just say, in terms of the Mayor, I've been here long enough to see a number of members stand up and protest against the Mayor, only to pop up a bit later on and be the candidate for that same position. So I'll say to people in Cumbria, be careful what you wish for.
Before I call for the next question, can I just remind members we've got around 40 minutes and we've got around 40 members, so please keep answers and questions succinct. Perrin Moon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome the move to devolve to every corner of the United Kingdom. But I'd like to ask the Minister, in relation to the upcoming Cornish devolution discussions, what is the Minister's vision of how the government will put into practice the legal obligations to protect and support Cornish national minority status in the same way that minority status is protected with our Celtic cousins in Wales and Scotland?
Minister.
Thank you, and thank you to members in Cornwall and also for leaders in Cornwall as well for a number of discussions that we've had. I know that devolution is an issue that is strongly felt. I know that identity in particular is an issue that is strongly felt, and we do recognise that we need to strike the right balance, and so the paper will point to a population size that is optimal in our view in terms of economic footprint, in terms of public service alignment, in terms of reconciling public service delivery boundaries. But we recognise in Cornwall, as in Cumbria, that we might have to take a more nuanced approach to reflect some of that. But I'll be clear as well that our view is to have established powers, which are incorporated settlements, devolved powers of significance. That will come with a mayor. But of course, Cornwall has agreed to a level 2 deal, and in the current white paper, that would be a foundation deal as a starter for that journey.
Dame Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And whatever your views on the different flavours of local government, surely we can all agree in this House that good local services are delivered when there are excellent, hard-working local councillors who have been democratically elected. And one of the things that is happening across this country in counties up and down the land at the moment is that county councillors are campaigning for re-election for 4-year terms next May. And this is an important decision for local people to make. It should be something that is part of those discussions in the election campaign next year. So can he take this opportunity to rule out any suggestion that he is cancelling any county council elections next year?
Minister.
Well, I mean, I tried to, well, in all things, I tried to be direct. And I have been direct that for those councils that come to the government with a request for reorganisation, if they meet the test and they have a credible programme in place, the elections will not likely take place the year after because they will be postponed to elect to a shadow authority for the authority that would replace the county and the districts. And so we're as clear as that. What there won't be, to give assurance, is the mass cancelling of elections for the sake of it and the hope and prayer that some councils may well come forward for reorganisation. It's got to be a balanced approach, it's got to be proportionate, and that's what we intend to do.
Gareth Snell.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Stoke-on-Trent is already a unitary authority, but surrounded on either side by a two-tiered district system of Newcastle and Staffordshire Moorlands, who are our friendly neighbours, proud communities, but fundamentally different places. So can the Minister set out what will happen to existing unitary authorities? Can he also say how, as part of this review, he will protect the identities of communities who look to a place rather than to a compass point and a county name? And if we're going to have new mayors with new powers, can he set out what the corresponding reduction of ministers in this place will be to reflect the reduced number of services we provide?
Minister.
Well, in terms of will we or won't we reduce the number of ministers, I can easily answer that and say that's well above my pay grade. But I hope there'll always be a need for a local government minister to oversee and to hold a hand and to be a well-wisher. In terms of the identity question, which is really important, any devolution or reorganisation has to get the balance, and the tests are applied in the white paper, and that's about getting the balance of the economic footprint, which is the real economy, to make sure that that footprint is recognised, public service boundary alignment, and making sure that as much as possible we align to public services across police and the health service and others, but also identity, to make sure that we capture that as much as possible. There will be trade-offs in some cases, but that is for local areas to come forward with the right proposal for their area after due consideration.
Leila Moran.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 42 of the councils across the country that have increased social homes, of those four lie in Oxfordshire. South Oxfordshire District Council has doubled the number of social homes it's delivered over the last 10 years. Meanwhile, Oxford City next door has halved it. So there are districts doing incredible work. Why should they face finding themselves lumped in with other underperforming councils? And surely, rather than having a distracting reorganisation, proper devolution to those councils doing well is the way to deliver for local people.
Minister.
There is nothing in the white paper that is about decrying the work that has gone before. In fact, there's a great deal of celebration of the work that local government, and in particular councillors in leadership roles, whether that's about community leadership as frontline councillors or council leaders and their executive, have provided on a range of issues. They are the builders of devolution. And so this is not about something being done to them from the top. This is about local areas who will come together and make the request to government for either local government reorganisation and or for devolution. And as a government, we will work as partners in that development. But we fully appreciate there are district councils across England that are doing a very good job at delivering good public services. But in the end, there also has to be an acceptance that that is not the most efficient way of delivering public services. There are other ways.
Chris Curtis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Minister for the ambition shown in his statement today, particularly on how we can get local authorities to be supporting the building of 1.5 million homes that we know that this country needs. Before the publication of the White Paper, the Department saw expression of interest from various areas. However, some of those initial submissions may no longer reflect the scale of ambition or the devolution options we now know are available. So can the Minister reassure me that authorities with greater ambition, who are ready to act swiftly in line with the powers and vision outlined in the White Paper, will be given the opportunity to revise their proposals and fast-track a mayoral model on geographies better suited to delivering results for their residents?
Minister.
So there was 3 kind of programmes that came on the transition to the new government. The first one was the kind of legacy devolution agreements that were agreed under the previous government but hadn't yet passed through Parliament that we wanted to reconcile. The second one were the areas that we wanted to target, that by and large were the areas in the north of England to complete the map of the north and to populate that area. The third one was a right around from the Deputy Prime Minister to get a real sense of where different areas might be up to in terms of their approach to partnerships, to the type of scale, to the type of geography. And so we saw the expression of interest process very much about a temperature check. And so the proposals that will come forward certainly aren't binding either on local areas or on the government, and we do expect that further proposals, including in the same areas, will come forward.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. What sort of guarantee can the Minister give that there will be new money from the Treasury to fund the costs of any local government reorganisation in Essex, to avoid the costs of that reorganisation resulting in cuts to public services or increased council taxes?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I apologise, it was raised earlier on, actually I didn't address it. The government will provide capacity to enable both devolution and also local government reorganisation through discussions with local authorities. Now, some of that might be funding, quite a lot of it might be support in terms of workforce development. So last week we launched the Workforce Development Group, which is a joint project between MHCLG, other government departments and also bodies like the LGA to make sure that we're actually addressing the workforce issues, because even before reorganisation we do know that in many counties they're struggling to recruit to jobs like adult social care, in many districts they're struggling to recruit to jobs like planning and issues like that. So there's a bigger issue here that we're looking to address.
Dave Robertson.
Speaker, can I draw the House's attention to my register of interest, which lists me as a member of Lichfield City and District Council. And it is the future of parish and town councils that I want to touch on, if I may. The paper talks in 2 places about stronger engagement between the new authorities and parish councils. But can the Minister go further than that and say how that's going to work? And particularly given their importance in places like Staffordshire, which is almost 1 million people, is 3% of the length of England, and has real centres of community and a lot of population centres which aren't currently reflected in their districts but are very much reflected in their town councils in places like Burnley.
Minister.
So again, we talk in the White Paper, but I also referenced in my opening remarks that it was the Labour government that introduced quality parish status, where we recognise that that tier of government has a very important role to play and actually can do far more if trusted and given the power. So we do see that town and parish councils have an important role to play, but in the end, that is notwithstanding reorganisation. In many places, reorganisation would need to take place, and parish and town councils could or couldn't do more, but that's, I would say, a slightly separate issue. As to proposals for individual areas to take into account issues like identity and belonging and the different units of government, we're happy to have those on a one-to-one basis. And I can assure the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, that there will be ample opportunity on a one-to-one basis to meet with me and fellow ministers, and also for drop-in sessions as well, to make sure that matters that aren't picked up on the floor can be picked up later.
Manuela Pertagella.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I refer the House to my register of interest as a district councillor. Real devolution means empowering local communities, not centralising power into regional superunitaries. Residents in my constituency of Stratford-on-Avon will be best represented by a South Warwickshire Unitary Council rather than a remote Warwickshire-wide unitary which will have 5 different local plans. Does the Minister agree that 500,000 minimum population is a top-down target that risks dividing existing communities and forcing together communities with no shared identity?
I think that's a fair point, but I'll be honest and say I'm losing track of the number of MPs that are standing up to declare that they're councillors still. Now, I recognise there's a transition, and I went through that transition myself, and there was an overlap in terms of being a councillor and being a member of Parliament. But in terms of the details about individual counties, again, it's for local areas to make the submission to government, and it's for government to assess the proposals that come forward. But I can say the government does not have a plan on a map for that county, but we do expect that the county and the districts will get together and work out a proposal that they can accept to submit to government that we can review.
Jane Kirkham.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Cornwall will welcome further devolution. We're a long way from London, but I wanted to continue the question about town councils, because in a place like Cornwall, where cuts to the unitary have meant town councils already taking on a lot of responsibility, how does the Minister see those town councils continuing in the future?
Minister.
Well, of course, that's precisely why when Labour was last in government and we brought forward that landmark legislation to create the Mayor of London and Parliaments in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland and the assemblies, that parish and town councils were given that quality parish status. It's why local government was given the powers of wellbeing and other matters, because the previous Labour government recognised, as this government recognises, which is if you're going to have devolution, it's got to be top to bottom and it's got to get the right powers to the right places. And we do see an absolutely critical role at a neighbourhood level of town and parish councils playing a role in this, and we look forward to further discussions with the sector.
Simon Hall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There is much to commend itself in the White Paper, and the Minister, I think, broadly is to be congratulated, but he knows as well as I do, as welcome as the multi-year settlement announcement is, that it's predicated on an outdated and effectively broken funding system. I understand the Treasury is not keen to revisit that in any meaningful way, but could I urge him still to consider a rural proofing mechanism to the funding formula to ensure that the additional costs of delivering local services in rural areas is recognised? And change is scary. I don't recognise the picture painted by the Honourable Lady for mid-Dorset and North Poole. In Dorset, where we went unitary, no sane person would ever want to go back to a two-tier system. But we benefited from the excellent skills of Paul Rousel, much missed, died earlier this year. Can the Minister ensure that there are expert teams within his department to work alongside those councils which wish to make this important change, which will deliver savings and better services to local people?
Minister.
Can I thank my predecessor, in fact, for the question and also the tone in which he dealt with us in opposition, and I honour that in return. The fair funding review is absolutely critical. We've committed to the multi-year financial settlement. That's about giving security, but we all know that there is no security if the money isn't sufficient to meet the demand. And so he and the House have our absolute assurance that all the cost factors, including the cost of rural service delivery, will be taken into account in a fair funding review.
Leo Alaba.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In cities such as Southend, East and Rochford, in comparable countries, a city like Southend would generate £55 billion more across the country. Can the Minister please explain what powers will the English devolution bill give to mayors so that they can drive local growth and fulfil their financial potential?
Well, I mean, kind of in there is a project, really. I remember in 2014 when the Greater Manchester devolution deal was signed, the principles about that was, one, to reform public services so that we focus on prevention rather than crisis management that's more expensive with worst outcomes, but also that we grow the local tax base because the area becomes more productive through that investment. I'll be honest and say we didn't see the investment in prevention reform, and I think that growth was stunted. But even in that context, growth in Greater Manchester has outperformed other areas, and I think that is in large part due to the devolution agreement that is in place, where that leadership and coordination has been imposed. But even by independent assessments, if we allow our regions to realise their full potential, it would be worth 30 to 50 billion pound of economy value that isn't being realised at the moment. So there is an alternative, and we have to grasp it.
James McMurdoch.
Yesterday, a former Labour deputy leader referenced my party as a threat to democracy. Now, I'm sure that was a cute turn of phrase for television, but given the framework you've laid out for elections next year to be gained so easily, isn't the real threat here potentially the Labour Party?
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't characterise the party opposite as a threat to democracy, but I think there might be a threat to sanity. I think we are all tested on a too regular basis by, I would say, fairly ridiculous statements that try to wedge and divide instead of coming together. And there's one thing about devolution, which is, regardless of party politics, what we have seen in local areas across Labour, the Democrats and the Conservatives is that when it comes to the people and the place and putting communities first, party politics are put to one side. And I extend that invitation to the Reform Party too.
Jim Dixon.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's instructive to hear a former local government minister on the benches opposite describe the current system as broken, which is probably why we need this white paper. And residents in my constituency of Dartford have grown weary and frustrated at non-delivery by various tiers of local government in Kent, particularly when it comes to failures to provide SEND support for pupils, as well as poor bus services compared to the neighbouring ones in London. What hope for better delivery across all services, schools, social care, health, transport, roads, might we have from the current white paper?
Yeah.
Thank you. I think it's been very difficult for the government to have an honest conversation with local government previously about what an adequate level of public service provision should be in a given place, because it knew full well it wasn't providing the resources to enable that to happen in a fair way across the country. When we fix the financial foundations of local government through the Fair Funding Review and the multi-year settlement, and we build the rigour around it, we will move away from the top-down hundreds and in some cases thousands of reporting metrics that we expect councils to report to from central government. We will look to simplify the funding system, to end unnecessary ring fences, act as shackles on local government. But in return for that, there has got to be governance, there's got to be accountability, and there's got to be a very clear responsibility to deliver the outcomes that the government want in return for that freedoms, flexibility and fair funding.
Clive Jones.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. My constituents will be waiting to see how the Department's plans for local government reorganisation affects Woking and Borough Council. They will want to ensure that their voices are listened to. If we are to be shuffled around, merged, abolished by Whitehall. Importantly, they will want to know if the government plans will hit their wallets. Therefore, can the Minister commit to ensuring that the funding for any changes will come from his department and does not come from council tax, which should instead be used to fund vital local services?
Minister.
It's only this week that we are seeing a genuine redistribution of money in the local government system so that money goes to areas that need it most. Because for far too long, deprivation has been taken out of the funding formula. Recognition that some tax bases are weaker at a local level than others were taken away from the funding formula. And so the recovery grant, £600 million, is intended to get to those areas. And in terms of value for money for public services and getting those down to a neighbourhood level, as I said before, there is a two-tier premium that is paid for both by local taxpayers to the tune of around £2 billion that can be better used for local public services, and by central government through the floor protections that we give to district councils that frankly could be better used in areas of high deprivation and need in other ways.
Alice MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I hope that Norfolk will be part of the devolution priority programme so we can unlock the powers and fundings that we need on areas from transport to housing. But can I ask the Minister specifically about the role of key cities? Because Norwich is a key national, regional economic power, but it needs devolution to fully unlock its potential. It's vital that they have a key role and a voice in this process, both devolution and reorganisation. Can he assure us that will be the case and set out the process for cities in particular to do that? Thank you.
Minister.
Yeah. Obviously, both Norfolk and Suffolk were two counties that we had inherited from the previous government. I'll be clear that we could not progress with that deal because it would have saw directly elected council leaders take on the assumed role of a mayor, but without the framework in place to support it. So we didn't support that. But we have been working constructively with both counties to look at a mayoral combined authority over a bigger footprint, and we do hope that they come forward as part of the project programme. That's a matter for them, and they may decide that now is not the right time, but I think there is huge potential. On the matter of reorganisation and devolution, and both Norwich and I would say Ipswich as well, it is very important in my view that when we look at reorganisation, there is a very strong anchor that holds that in terms of place and economy. And of course, in this case, Norwich will be central to that.
Sir Desmond Swain.
What say will voters in the New Forest have if there are proposals to remove either their district or their county council?
So the process of local reorganisation is a statutory process, so it requires local areas to produce plans, as with devolution, I should say, as well. And both of those are required to go to public consultation to solicit views. That's part of the process. When the formal process starts, the government's role then is to assess the proposals and the consultation as it's submitted, and then we don't take a view on geography and form up until we make the final decision.
Andrew Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The biggest issues holding back economic growth in mid-Cheshire are long-term underinvestment in our transport infrastructure and the lack of a joined-up skills agenda working with businesses across local authority borders. Now, this is not a unique issue to my constituency. The reality is that in 2010, East Germany's economy overtook Northern England's, and that trend has accelerated over the last 14 years. What new powers will the English devolution bill give strategic authorities to drive improvements in local transport and take control of their sub-region skills agenda?
Minister.
Well, I mean, this is one of the reasons why we were so keen to complete the map of the north of England, which is most would accept that certainly for strategic transport that those cross county boundaries. And so if we think about connectivity in the north of England, how Lancashire, Greater Manchester, the Liverpool City region, Cheshire, Cumbria and the rest are joined up, and then even into Yorkshire, requires coordination, and what we want to see are mayors and strategic authorities working together across that pan-region so that even more powers can be devolved to address the type of issues that he talks about.
Ben Ops objective.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. According to the White Paper, a constituency like mine at Huntingdon will see Cambridgeshire County Council and Huntingdonshire District Council merge into a unitary council as a principal authority under Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority as a strategic authority. My question is that how will unitary councillors fulfil the roles of both multiple district and county councillors in a part-time capacity? And what does this also mean for the forthcoming Combined Authority mayoral election in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough?
Minister.
So the forthcoming election for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough will go ahead as planned. There is no proposal to change the boundary of the what is currently a combined authority that will move to a strategic authority. Local government, I should say, reorganisation, where there is an existing mayoral combined authority, providing it is coterminous in terms of the review that's undertaken, doesn't have an impact at all. All that happens is that the membership of the combined authority would change to reflect the new council structures as they appear.
Tom Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As a former councillor of 10 years who sought election to this place to give power back to communities, I'm absolutely thrilled by this devolution white paper, and I congratulate the Minister for bringing it forward. Two things. On page 16, there's an ambition to make the Mayor the Chair of the Integrated Care Partnership and also Police and Crime Commissioner, just as in South Yorkshire, and I commend that, and I'd like to hear a bit more about it. On page 94, there's a proposal for a right to buy community assets. Hengistbury Head Outdoor Centre in my constituency has just found out it's about to be a community benefit society with a lease for 99 years, but it's taken far too long to get to this place. I'd like to invite the Minister to come to Hengistbury Head Outdoor Centre. It may involve getting in a kayak, to find out more about what this right to buy could involve on the ground level, and I'd love to know a little bit more about what the government's intent will be.
Minister.
Thank you. Well, I know there are many Labour and Cooperative members of Parliament that have really been campaigning very hard on the extended community right to buy, and that's about giving communities the power to take over those important community assets on their high street and in town centres in a way that is meaningful. And so the member for local growth, the Minister for Local Growth I should say, is working very hard now on a communities white paper that will follow, that will put far more detail on this, because it's not just about, in the end, that community right to buy, it's about a genuine shift where people feel far more control, power and agency in the places where they live.
Mark Francois.
Thank you, ma'am. Trying to create multiple unitary authorities in Essex won't work. It won't have public support. It'll take the best part of a parliament to implement. It won't save money. In fact, quite the opposite. There's a risk local government will grind to a halt in the meantime. As for mayors, in 23 years of canvassing in my constituency, I have never once had a constituent say to me on a doorstep, "I want a mayor of Essex." Indeed, looking up the road to London, can I tell the Minister, the last thing on earth we want in Essex is another Sadiq Khan.
Minister.
So I'll put him down as undecided.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Minister's ambitious announcement that has been made today and the opportunity devolution could bring to the people of Pompey. And I'd like to thank the Minister and his team for the time that they have given to MPs in this House and his offer of an open door. Madam Deputy Speaker, Portsmouth is one of those densely populated parts of the country, and alongside a commitment to the desperate and urgent need for affordable housing, will the Minister commit to using the English Devolution Bill to empower my communities with the right to buy beloved community assets such as empty shops, pubs and much-needed community spaces to ensure that cities like mine and the people in them feel a real pride and ownership once again?
Minister.
And I think that's the point, really, that when we talk about important community assets, of course we see them from an economic point of view, that are far better to be used and be productive. But in the end, we also recognise that they're hugely important in terms of community identity and community pride. And I would say in a lot of working class areas, including Oldham, Chadderton and Royton, where I represent, it is the local civic building, it's the local pub, it's the local church, where they aren't just buildings, they are part of people's story and people really care about them.
Caroline Burden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A top-down reorganisation of a failing council like Conservative-run Devon County Council is a bit like shuffling the deck chairs on a sinking ship. But we know that chronic underfunding for years has made it impossible for councils to fulfil their obligations, so I do welcome the multi-year funding settlement. However, creating larger regional authorities is not devolving power, it's removing power and responsibility away from local communities and shifting it to a distant, higher-tier authority that, in a place like Devon, will feel remote to towns and parishes. And we must have the opportunity to pass our verdict in May on Conservative-run Devon County Council, which has been failing our most vulnerable children for over a decade. So can the Minister reassure me that these elections will go ahead as planned in 2025?
Minister.
Well, I think it would be rude to deny the good people of Devon a good spat between the Conservatives and the Lib Democrats. But in all seriousness, it's for local areas to decide whether they want to apply to government to be part of the reorganisation programme or not. If we receive a request from that area as any other, then we will receive it and administer it in a fair way.
Steve Race.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to welcome the huge opportunity that's present in this white paper, especially for cities like Exeter, which is also held back by Tory Devon County Council, the upper-tier authority. Can the Minister confirm that devolution and reorganisation running hand in hand can help key economic growth cities like Exeter to retain, enhance, expand its historic self-governance, working as part of a strategic authority as an equal partner to unleash its economic potential?
Minister.
Absolutely. I think one of the problems that was keenly felt with the previous devolution framework is that it didn't quite give enough regard to the role of district councils, who were the primary city, the university city, the travel to work area, the economic hub. And what reorganisation does give is the ability for those places to grow, to become unitaries and to take their place on the new strategic authorities.
John Glenn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 15 years ago, just before I joined this House, we had the reorganisation of
Wiltshire Council into Wiltshire Unitary and the abolition of several district councils. We now have another reform, it seems, and the heart of Wessex is the probable outcome for Somerset, Dorset and Wiltshire. What reassurance could the Minister offer the people of Salisbury, who still have some difficulty accommodating the abolition of Salisbury District Council? Can he assure them that these proposed changes will be positive in terms of the combination of resources for strategic investment on transport and other services like that?
Minister.
I think through any local government reorganisation, there's always a fine balance, I think, between trying to create a cohesive new, but respecting the very strongly felt local identities that people feel that are very unique. And I think when it's done right, the council can be confident in its own standing because it knows it's delivering outstanding services. I would say when it's done wrong, it's tried to impose an identity on a place because of the form of the council that doesn't reflect local identity. And I would say for those of us in towns like Oldham that went through 1974 reorganisation, that is as keenly felt as other areas. But that is not about the type of government, that is about culture and approach, and when done well, it can work.
Adam Jurgo.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to pay tribute to all the district councillors in the loyal and ancient borough of Newcastle-under-Lyme, including the Tories who tried and failed to defeat me, but I'll be nice to them, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, on page 10 of the White Paper, the Minister notes, and I quote, "We must end top-down micro-managing." I agree, and notwithstanding how much of this announcement was trailed in the press and social media in recent days, can I press him on the point raised by my neighbour in Stoke-on-Trent Central? The Minister says there will be trade-offs when it comes to local identities. Who will decide ultimately on those trade-offs? And when will people in the real world be able to have their say on these proposals?
Minister.
Well, I mean, I would say that people in the real world had their say at the ballot box because devolution and taking power out of this place was a manifesto commitment that we are absolutely clear-eyed to deliver, and the White Paper is about delivering that manifesto commitment. In terms of process and consultation, one is for local areas to determine what proposal they would submit to government. Government has not got a proposal that we're submitting to local areas. And secondly, it would be ideal, wouldn't it, if local areas could get around a single proposal so that government's only role is to receive it and say thank you very much, rather than choosing between alternative proposals being put forward from the same area.
Alison Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Minister for the time he made available to me at one of his surgery appointments recently, and welcome the announcement of something that we discussed then about the ending of bidding for discrete funding pots that was a trademark of the last Conservative government. I'd just like to ask how these announcements are not going to impinge on the announcements his department made last week. My honourable friend, the member for Westmoreland and Lonsdale, eloquently set out the challenges of reorganisation in Cumbria. How are we going to make sure that those housing targets are able to be delivered during this period of uncertainty?
Minister.
We are very mindful that there's a lot of change in the system quite early on. That is quite deliberate. We believe strongly that when the general election next comes, the judgment that people will make is whether they feel better in their own financial security, they've got money in their pocket, they feel like they're getting on in life, and they feel secure in the place where they live, and local public services are part of that. And so it's been a very deliberate decision through the White Paper and other measures to deal with the structural changes that are needed early on in the Parliament so that we can get those out of the way and people can really see the benefit towards the end.
John Slinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I should declare an interest as a member of Rugby Borough Council. Madam Deputy Speaker, page 16 of the White Paper speaks about reforming and joining up public services and about over the long term the government's ambition of aligning public service boundaries. In this regard, could my honourable friend expand on how these reforms can enhance the ability of people, through their elected representatives, to hold public service leaders to account and exercise greater democratic control over such services?
Minister.
So we talk quite a lot around how there just wasn't sufficient funding in the system provided over a decade long of underfunding. But that doesn't mean there wasn't growing cost in the system. And what we have found is because local government in the end are the place where all the demand presents to, whether it likes it or not, when there's failure in other parts of the system, whether that's a failure of developers to build enough properties, whether it's about the NHS not able to quite coordinate with community services, or whether it's about the private sector, say in children's services, essentially exploiting the audience that it has and providing very eye-watering sums. In the end, we have got to redesign local public services around people, around place and communities. And public sector reform and prevention is part of that. The alignment of public service boundaries are critical. If you don't have that democratic control and oversight over things like the ICBs or the Police and Crime Commissioner that's aligned to these strategic authorities, we will not make the progress that we need to make.
Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I welcome the intention to reorganise local government that the government has set out. Clearly, this is something that has been in play for a while. But he'll know that the independent and sovereign Kingdom of Kent has had an identity of its own for about 2,000 years. Now, the exact borders within that identity are something open to some debate, even today, quite extraordinarily, but they are. Will he please tell us what are the priorities that he's going to use in order to prioritise the devolution priority plan? Is he going to be championing the size, the 500,000 plus? Is he going to be championing the transport infrastructure? Is he going to be championing the historic affiliations? How is he going to understand this, and how is he going to prioritise for that priority plan?
Minister.
Well, I think he outlined exactly the balance that we're trying to get, really. One is about size for efficiency through both devolution strategic authorities and through local reorganisation, if that follows in the same area. Two, the real economy that's functioning, because in the end it's about growth and making sure that a functioning economy can be identified and can grow. But then, of course, mix them with identity to make sure that that works. And it goes, I think, in most places, that the historic counties are the building blocks for that. But I know some boundaries, as we've seen in Cumbria, are quite hotly contested. But we're not going back 2,000 years.
Noah Law.
Madam Deputy Speaker, parts of Britain such as Cornwall, which have national minority status, have been working towards devolution for decades, if not centuries. So, given that the Minister has outlined a certain pace and ambition in this bill, will he work with Cornwall Council, ourselves and town and parish councils to ensure that that pace and ambition is delivered on and gets Cornwall its rightful place at the County of Nations and Regions in due course?
Minister.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a number of competing proposals, really. I don't believe in kind of elephants in the room. One of it was an explicit proposal to have a Devon and Cornwall combined authority with a mayor that was proposed, I would say, by and large from Devon. That was met with, I think, quite animated resistance, I would say, from Cornwall for different reasons. It is not our intention, and frankly, there aren't enough hours in the day to keep on getting involved in local disputes about boundaries and identity. What we want, and this is genuine, is for local areas to self-organise, to come up with a proposal that's right for their area, and to make a proposal to government so that we can work in partnership and deliver the outcome of getting powers out of this place into places like Cornwall.
Ellie Chowns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the elements of this white paper that are about devolution, but we have to recognise that some elements are about concentration. The Minister has talked about the two-tier premium, but the reality is that his proposals mean that a local tier in some places will be replaced by a more distant mayoral tier. Does the Minister recognise that this risks creating a bit of a democratic deficit? Surely we should be trying to keep the local in local government as much as possible. And given that average turnout in the last lot of mayoral elections in the last year was 30%, what will he do to address that risk of democratic deficit? And in particular, will he introduce a fair and proportional system for local elections?
Thank you. I mean, the truth is that these strategic authorities are about taking power from this place and giving it down to communities. Every minister gets hundreds of sign-offs every single day. But I can tell you the number of sign-offs where the minister and members across will remember this, have to sign off whether or not a cyclist should pass through a local park because the parish council has to apply to central government for permission, is part of the centralising nature of this state that we've got to change.
Luke Meyer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy
Speaker, can I welcome the statement and the white paper today. Centralisation is part of the reason why we are one of the most regionally unequal advanced economies, as IPPR North has set out. But it's important that these strategic authorities are run well. And so can I ask what steps he will be taking to ensure they're funded fairly, and what assurances he can give that strategic authorities must demonstrate responsible stewardship of the public finances?
Well, that's why there is a proposal in the paper to regularise, if you like, the mayoral precept process. Now, where combined authorities exist and they don't apply a precept, it is not that mayors and combined authorities don't cost money. Of course they do. It's just that local authorities pay for it through a levy or a contribution outside of the precept. Our view is that for transparency and accountability and political accountability, that when mayors and combined authorities or strategic authorities are spending money, the public have a right to see that identified on their council tax and make a judgment about whether that money is being spent wisely or not.
Dame Karen Bradley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Minister, the residents of Staffordshire Moorlands do not want to be subsumed into Stoke-on-Trent. So can he give a guarantee that they will not be forced into a devolution deal against their will, and that the decisions that matter to them will continue to be taken in the Moorlands and not in Stoke-on-Trent?
Minister.
Well, if I got myself into neighbourhood disputes, honestly, I don't know for hours in the day. What I will say is that I hope through reading the white paper that this isn't seen as a forcing together. Genuinely, it is seen as a distribution of power from a centralising state to communities where it really matters. And so my hope is that local disputes, and some of which I'm sure are well rehearsed and go back quite a long time, are put to one side, because in the end, the prize, the greater good, is for the benefit of all.
Peter Swallow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the Minister's recognition that unitary authorities deliver for residents? Bracknell Forest Council is an example of a unitary authority promoting a strong sense of space and delivering economic growth. And though it is small, it is mighty. Will my honourable friend agree to work with Bracknell Forest Council to develop a plan that works for Bracknell?
Minister.
Yeah, it's our absolute commitment that we will work in partnership and we will give capacity and time to make sure that those local nuances are reflected in whatever follows.
And the final question from the backbenches, Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Minister is well aware, he's just concluded the Greater Lincolnshire Devolution deal, which I welcome and support. But he will be aware that there are two unitary authorities in the north of the county and the rest is a two-tier system. Can you just clarify whether the government expect that two-tier area to actually come forward with proposals for unitaries? And could I remind him that if that is the case, the sparsity factor plays with Lincolnshire, and the 500,000 target is far too high. Prior to 1974, there were actually 3 county councils to cover the whole county.
Minister.
So, I mean, first of all, we don't have a proposal for Greater Lincolnshire in terms of reorganisation, but that's not to say that conversations aren't taking place locally about making a representation to government. So when that letter goes out later on today, we do expect that areas that are currently not on our list will come forward on that basis. In the end, it's a matter for local areas to determine what submission they want to make. But in terms of sparsity and having an anchor that makes sense, I completely understand the point he makes.
We now come to the next statement, and I'll give the front benches some time to swap over.